Okay, really, 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 really use this one. If you make a blooper reel, you can just make fun of me. I need to read the questions better. Okay, here we go. Before using an analytic rubric, what type of scoring method did you use and how do these methods compare? Before using an analytic rubric, I essentially awarded points to everything on the lab reports that I would grade. So every single piece of the lab report was awarded anywhere from a half point to multiple points depending on what the student was doing. In the analytic rubric, what I do now is I assign sections points. So in my old scoring system, for someone's data table, I would assign a half point to a title, a half point to proper units, a half point to proper data, and a half point to just actually formatting the table correctly. Where now in the analytic rubric, that same data section now is just going to be 2 points. So I'm not assigning a specific half point value to anything, I'm just looking at the total data table out of 2 points instead of each individual component being a specific set point value. What do you see as the benefits of using an analytic rubric for you and for the students? The great benefit I've seen is kind of the end result of the grade of the lab reports. With my prior system where I was assigning individual points to every piece of the lab, I found that as I was going through the purpose, the procedure, the calculations, and the data analysis, that kids would be losing ticky-tacky points. So a half point in their data table for not having units, a half point in their calculations for not having proper significant figures, a point in their calculations for having a calculation set up incorrectly, 2 points off in their error analysis because they forgot to link it back to the percent yield for the lab. So I found that I was taking off all these gigantic chunks of points, and when I was reading through the lab, it was actually a pretty well written lab. The analysis portion was really strong. You could tell they really understood the purpose of the lab. You could tell that they understand how to interpret their data. But the end result would be like a low C, middle D in terms of the points because of all the little places I was docking them. With the analytic rubric now, instead of looking at the data table as, oh, you didn't have a title, there's a half point off, it's, oh, you didn't have a title, so this is an A data table, maybe it's a B data table. And so instead of losing, half the points, they're now only maybe being docked, 15 or 20% of the points for that section, which is a B instead of maybe a C or a D. And I really, really liked that. I've realized now that when I'm giving kids back their labs, the grade that they're receiving is really a lot more indicative of what they actually understood from the lab. So a kid's getting back a B lab that I truly feel demonstrates B understanding. Where before in my old system, sometimes I would give, especially an honor student, back a lab that was like a C plus, C minus, and I could tell that through the analysis section, the kid really had a better understanding of that. And so I like that it's giving me a much truer read of what the kids are really understanding out of the lab. The other thing I really like is with science being a performance class within the lab itself, I never really had any points built in for kids just doing the physical lab. So it's a 50-minute period, sometimes it's multiple 50-minute periods to get the data, and I wasn't awarding that portion of the lab any points. So a kid could be doing a lab over the course of 3 days and then turn in their lab report and get a 20% because they just had no idea what the data analysis was. But as I was walking through the lab over the course of those 3 days, they could interact with their partner, they could interact with me, I could ask them questions to help them understand what was occurring. And that wasn't valued at all in my old system. And now with the analytic rubric, the lowest grade a student can get is a 60%. So it's almost like those points are kind of built in now to the fact that if they do everything that I'm asking them to do for the lab report, they should at least get a 60%. So it's kind of like you have those built-in points for the being there and the doing of the lab, which is really, really nice. What do you see as the challenges of using an analytic rubric and what took some getting used to? Some of the challenges are it's really hard to make like that perfect rubric. So sometimes I'll look at the different categories that I have, especially for the conclusion portions of my rubric, and I'll look at them going, oh yeah, this is going to be great. It's really going to be, easy for me to grade these lab reports. And as I'm reading through the conclusion, I'll look at my B category and my C category and go, oh man, I really wish I would have had this in the C category because this is what a C understanding would be versus a B understanding. And so it's almost like I wish that I could use or had labs from kids from last year that I could use the rubric for before I used it for this year's kids to kind of work out some of those kinks. So I feel like each year that I'm using the rubric, it's going to get a little bit better. What takes some getting used to is how I'm actually assigning the points to each section, because I used to just take off a quarter point here, a half point there, a full point here. It was really easy to get my point totals at the end, but with the analytic rubric now being an A, B, C, D, when I'm looking at a conclusion section, let's say, and a kid is kind of in the BC range, I'm like, all right, well, this is going to be like a low B, it's going to be an 80%, and it might be 7 points. So I have to then do some math to figure out, well, what's 80% of 7 points. So it's not like it's a huge deal, but it does take a little bit more time to try and figure out that point system just for me in science, because I'm like down to the number, where I know there's probably other ways to solve that problem, but we all know I'm weird, it's okay. In what context have you used analytic rubrics, and how do you use them? We use them primarily for our lab reports. So our formal lab reports that we have our students write, there's usually about 1 per unit in honors, sometimes a little bit less than that depending on how long the unit is. In reg, it's usually about 1 to 2 a semester. And so we're using those for the formal lab reports that are turned into us. And we use them to grade those labs. How I plan to use them now that I've started making them with Ellen and Amy is I plan to use them more. I've been creating some document-based questions for my chemistry classes that I'm going to start using later this semester. So I see myself using the rubrics to grade those, and I also I'm planning on starting to use them for the type 3 questions that we're going to be having, the level 3 questions that we're going to start adding to our different assessments over the next year or so in chemistry. So I kind of see myself using them in that matter as well. The end.